Boker Tov, everybody.
Boker Tov.
Look at Tove. I was just going back to print out the handout, so
Good, good, good.
I'm getting back on the email for a minute.
So Karen, you calling from work, huh?
I'm sorry, calling from work? What do you mean?
Oh, you're in the office? No?
This is my kitchen.
That's your kitchen with a, all right,
Well,
what's
it's just essentially my office anyway, so yeah.
on
I'm
your
calling
left?
from
It
work.
looks like a microscope or something. I'm not
Oh,
sure. Yeah.
I wish I had a microscope. No, it's a juicer,
Oh, okay. That's,
a non-functional juicer, but we like the shape of it. We haven't been able to feel like we could throw it away.
looked like a lab. I was-
Oh, okay.
Are people busy watching the trial right now? What's everybody doing?
Anything's possible. I know I watched part of it yesterday and got sick. You know, it's sickening.
It is sickening.
And it's also worthless because they could basically have him standing there with a sign saying "Kill Pence," and they're not going to vote for it anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's
What's my
depressing.
sound?
Now, hopefully, he'll go to court, and there he'll be convicted.
Yeah.
All right, I lost my sound. I'm gonna have to sign back in again. That's what I'll do. I don't remember how to do it. Wait, built-in system.
How are you, Bob? How are you, Marcia?
Fine, getting ready for some very, very cold weather coming
Yeah,
up.
I see, like 20s.
20s or even in the teens one night, Monday
have it.
night, I think. Yeah.
Overnight. That's not the high for the day.
No, but the plants
No?
will be in
Yeah.
bad shape.
Yep.
We'll
Wonderful.
manage.
We just shoveled our snow in Pennsylvania.
Hello?
Oh, God.
Sorry, I'm testing the mic.
I do not miss that. It was a major snowstorm in
It's
New York
pretty.
that drove me south.
Is that right?
Yeah. I lived in Rockland County and I was taking a class in Westchester and I came out and it had snowed tremendously. And it took me 3 hours to go essentially about 10 miles. I get home, I had second car, I had to shovel the car out from the drive. It was in the street and you couldn't leave it there. Took me an hour and a half to shovel the car with somebody helping me to shovel the car, to put it in the driveway, to get the driveway cleaned out. I no sooner finished and along came a snowplow and I said, I'm moving. I'm out of here.
Were you in New City by any chance?
Not far in Nanuet. Yep. New
Okay,
City was, yeah.
Because I had a cousin who lived there. Actually, they just moved to Florida, so
Yeah.
same sort of impetus.
Yeah, my first job was in Nanuet with Rabbi Simon Potak, Chaim's brother.
Really?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
very traditional community.
Yeah, right. Isn't there a highly Orthodox community right there or right near there?
Muncie is about 4 miles away, and the result was there were so many kosher restaurants. I never cooked for Shabbat, never. 7 years I would go, I'd get ribs, I'd get whatever I wanted. It was awesome. It was awesome.
Oh, well, no perfect situation.
Well, Mark, welcome to the Gulf Coast Hurricane Houston territory.
Right, right. We have our different issues here, right?
So,
Some mom on Facebook shared a picture that her kid sent her from college.
Uh-huh.
where it snowed earlier in the week. I know Larissa's been really excited about the snow in Indianapolis.
Oh,
Anyway,
God.
this kid shared a picture of their car parked in the parking lot at their apartment building, and they said, they didn't know what to do, that how do you get your car out when there's snow? And the mom is like, what, how deep is the snow? And in the picture, the snow was like 1 inch.
You gotta love
I
it.
usually end up every couple of years in New York for the Women's Caucus for Art meeting in February, because they go when the College Art Association is there, or Chicago. Last year we were in Chicago. So I've been through some snowstorms in that area. It's like, I can remember it was beautiful. We were in a hotel in Manhattan and there was a blizzard and everything shut down. And it was gorgeous out there. And if you could, Manhattan with nobody moving, quiet, snow on the streets, clean white snow. But it was pretty limited what you could get to eat or anything.
For sure. All right, let's do it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Here we go. Okay. So we are now picking up in the middle of the 1800s. Okay, that's where we find ourselves. Towards the middle of that century, two events occurred which profoundly disturbed Jewish, non-Jewish relationships throughout the world. Among other outcomes, they gave rise within Jewish tradition to a protectionist era, during which many notable Jewish personalities and organizations devote themselves ultimately to the defense of Jewish interests. So let's get into event one, and then we'll deal with number two as well. Event one, 1840, the Damascus Affair. The Damascus Affair is an incident in which the accusation of ritual murder, now we're talking the 1800s now, ritual murder is brought against members of the Jewish community of Damascus. 8 notable Jews were falsely accused of murdering a Christian monk, imprisoned him after having imprisoned him and tortured him. Several of the imprisoned, they were imprisoned and tortured. I apologize. The people, the Jews, the 8. Several of them, while they were being tortured, died. So we're not talking about they were made uncomfortable. Several of them died, and others were forced to convert to Islam. In addition, now that's the Muslim populace of Damascus that falls upon the synagogue in the suburb of Jobar. They pillage it and destroy the Torah scrolls. So let's give a little bit of background as to what has happened here. On the evening of February 5th, a couple days ago, 1840, a monk by the name of Father Thomas and his servant disappeared without a trace in Damascus, Syria. This monk, who had practiced medicine, was well known in the Jewish, the Christian, and the Muslim circles. And some days prior to his disappearance, he had a dispute with a Turkish muleteer who allegedly had heard him blaspheme Muhammad. So there was some background of a conflict with the Muslims, whereupon the Turk is reported to have said, "That dog of a Christian shall die by my hand." Nonetheless, Christians in the city accused the Jews of murdering the monk. In March, the editor of a Paris newspaper proclaims, rightly or wrongly, the Jews have the terrifying and inconceivable reputation of sacrificing a Christian on their Passover and distributing the blood to their co-religionists in the region. So the question is, how does the disappearance become a possible murder and then a ritual murder? How do Jews combat a lie about terrible and inconceivable crimes, particularly when a lie erupts in a world and a time in which people are now considering themselves enlightened? This is not the medieval ages, okay? In the 1800s, one Western European nation after another had granted minority rights to citizens. All right. In 1861, Russia frees its serfs. 4 years later, here in the Americas, the United States frees its slaves. 1876, reluctantly and under great pressure, the Ottoman Empire grants non-Muslims civic equality. This is a new era. And yet, despite all of that progress, discrimination and persecution persist through the 1800s. And instead of turning to reason and science to challenge old myths, instead people use reason and science to justify their prejudices. When the disappearance of Father Thomas and his servant led to charges of ritual murder against prominent Jews in Damascus, a number of educated people in Europe and the Middle East readily believed those accusations, not because Judaism was seen as a threat to Christianity, but because they saw the Jews as a separate and dangerous race. The Damascus affair reveals the impact of nationalism and racism on anti-Semitism. This is new. This is not religious prejudice. Although Damascus as a city is Muslim in its structure, it's also home to about 12,000 Christians and 5,000 Jews. And each group lived in its own quarter, but they nonetheless tended to intermingle in the markets, and some of them knew one another socially as well. Think Jerusalem today, and you have at least somewhat of a picture. In the 1840s, what's going on in the Ottoman Empire in general is it's losing power. 9 years earlier, in 1831, Muhammad Ali, not the boxer, rather the viceroy of Egypt, had driven the Ottomans out of Syria and had made his adopted son, Sharif Pasha, the governor general of Syria. This dispute between Egypt and the Ottoman Empire attracted attention in all over Europe. All right. The leaders of the European nations are eager to expand their economic and political influence in the region, so that the minute there's any turmoil, they are looking carefully. Throughout the 1800s, these nations, European nations, competed for colonies, for markets, and for influence. France, which had occupied Algeria since 1830, hoped to gain new territories in North Africa and the Middle East. The leaders of France supported Egypt and Muhammad Ali. As a result, the British and the Austrians backed the Ottoman Empire because they're worried about French expansionism. So now you've got the Egyptians and the Ottoman Empire in battle, and you've got the French and the British supporting alternative sides of this because of the fear of expansionism. To make things even more complicated, just in case it wasn't confusing enough, a few people in Syria in the 1840s weren't under the protection of either the Ottomans or the Egyptians. Among them was Father Thomas, who, although he lived in Damascus for over 30 years, he was a missionary from France under French protection. So soon after he disappears, the monks notify the Count de Réty-Menton. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. My French is Greek to me. All right, he's the French consul in Syria, so he is notified. 3 weeks later, the consul sends a report to his superiors that emphasizes the victim's connection to France. He wants to remind France this is somebody who has French connections. Reading number 1, Marcia, I've got you in the first square. You get to read. You need to unmute.
Okay. An appalling drama has just stained the city of Damascus in blood. The fact that the principal victim had direct ties to the French consulate, that he occupied a position that was both public and consecrated, that those who played the primary role in the scene of murder enjoy a high social position, and above all, that their actions were inspired by an anti-human idea, all conjoined to justify the length and detail of what I am about to report. On the afternoon of the 5th of this month, Father Thomas, a missionary and chaplain of the French Capuchin monastery at Damascus, left in the direction of the Jewish quarter in order to put up a notice on the door of one of the synagogues about an auction for the benefit of a poor European family. He was due the following day, the 6th, to have dinner with the other members of the religious orders at Dr. Massari's, where he failed to appear. His absence was rendered the more unusual by the fact that he was not at the monastery at the usual time for the celebration of the Mass, and also by the simultaneous disappearance of his only domestic servant. However, this could initially be explained by the supposition that Father Thomas had gone to one of the neighboring villages in order to vaccinate some of the children there. Informed of what had happened, I went to the monastery where the street was full of Christians from all the different sects who were shouting that Father Thomas had been slain by the Jews.
So 2 years after, thank you, 2 years after, 2 days after his disappearance on February 7th, this French consul reports the disappearance of to the Egyptian General Sharif Pasha, the guy who's running the area, and he asks his permission to lead the police in a search of the Jewish quarters, which is believed to be the last place that the two men had been seen. Sharif Pasha has his own political motivations. He's looking to court French sympathies, and so he says, go for it. All right. And as a result of that search, they bring in a barber by the name of Solomon Halek, Halek, to the French consulate for questioning. After 3 days of interrogation, the barber continues to insist that he knew nothing about what had happened. Describing Halek's refusal to talk as obstinance, Ratimenton claims that he has no choice but to turn the man over to the Egyptian General Sharif Pasha. Now, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what would happen next because torture was a routine practice within the Egyptian controlled territories. He understood what he was doing. And after brutal beatings, Halek confesses. He tells authorities that Thomas had been brought to the home of a Jewish businessman where his throat was slit by several Jews, including a rabbi. And Rona, you have reading number 2.
The Jews collected the blood in a large silver bowl because it was to serve for their Passover holiday. They stripped the dead friar of his vestments, took his body to another room, cut it to pieces, and crushed its bones with an iron grinder. They put everything into a big coffee sack and threw it into a ditch. Then they poured the blood into bottles, which they gave to the rabbis.
Okay.
Wow.
Right. 7 of the richest and most respected Jews in the community were arrested. After torture so brutal that 2 of them died, they too confessed. The authorities looked for no other evidence. And so Sharif Pasha then at that point takes hostages. He's looking for one more, and that is he takes 60 boys, ages 5 to 11, in the hopes that their frightened parents would talk. Mind you, there is no evidence of anything other than circumstantial here. This is the same blood libel that had been used against the Jews in Europe and the Middle East for over 600 years. What makes this accusation different, however, is that this time it has the backing of not only the French consul, but nearly every European and American diplomat in the region. The American vice consul stationed in Beirut claims in a letter to the US Secretary of State that a most barbarous secret for a long time suspected in the Jewish nation at last came to light in the city of Damascus, that of serving themselves of Christian blood in their unleavened bread at Easter, a secret which in those 1840 years must have made many unfortunate victims. This is the US report. In the 1840s, as you can imagine, news traveled slowly. The first telegraph line was not built until 1844, and the telephone was not invented until 1870. And as a result, for the next month, most Europeans were unaware of the events. Most European Jews, particularly, were unaware of the events until early March. And at that point, a stream of letters starts arriving from various sources. Frantic Jews all over the Middle East are writing to relatives, friends, and anyone who might be able to provide some help. Anton von Loren, who is Austrian consul general in Alexandria, sends a note to James Rothschild. Now, the Rothschild name is probably one that strikes a bell. He is a member of one of the richest and most influential families of the 1800s. And many people believed that the Rothschilds had enormous influence. But that's not exactly true. And the brothers themselves were acutely aware of the limits of their influence. Anti-Semitism affected all Jews, including the rich. Solomon Rothschild and his family lived in a hotel because no Jew, even one with the title of baron and as loaded in money and as much money as he had, was allowed to buy a home in Vienna. The European newspapers spoke of the barbarity of the Jews. They denounced the horror of the crime, and they expressed the outrage of human sacrifice. Now, human sacrifice is bad. Let me just make this clear. Whether or not the Jews are guilty is a whole different story. All right. Some Jews responded to these sensational stories with indignant letters to the editor. And one of those letters, this is important, one of those letters is written at the request of James Rothschild, based on the information from von Loren and others in the region. The author was Adolphe Crémieux, the vice president of the Central Consistory of French Jews. His letter changed the way the Damascus affair was being treated in the French press. Crémieux questioned the basic assumptions that were being made by the authorities. The following three were the questions. Why? Why would a few wealthy Jews who are plotting a horrendous crime have let this stranger, this barber, in on their scheme? Question one. Two, how likely would it be that murderers eager to escape detection would dispose of the bones of their victims right near their homes? And three, why would Jews be collecting blood for Passover in early February, 2 months before Passover is to occur? He also pointed out that on the issue of ritual murder, Jewish law does not permit Jews to eat eggs that have a blood spot. Therefore, how likely was it that such a religion would allow the use of blood to make unleavened bread? So those were his arguments. The Rothschilds and other Jewish leaders met privately with the heads of governments and religious leaders. Their success varied. The Austrian and British government, who are supporting the Ottomans, not the Egyptians here, are eager to help. It's in their interest to do so. Some Jews tried to persuade Pope Gregory the 16th to speak out, but he chose to remain silent, and he banned all public discussion of the incident in Rome. When asked for permission to reprint statements made by earlier popes that condemned Christians who had accused Jews of ritual murder, the Pope refused. As people around the world followed the debate, public opinion began to shift. At a July 8th meeting in London, Christian clergymen and members of British Parliament joined others in England in protesting the tortures and the charges of ritual murder. Similar rallies took place in Paris, in New York, and in Philadelphia. The US ambassador, thank God, to the Ottoman Empire, asked Americans to help Jews in Damascus. American diplomats throughout the region quickly adjusted their stance on the case. Now, the influence of this incident and the reactions to it had repercussions that were really considerable. According to Diner, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Diner, in the Jews of the United States, 1654 to 2000, he wrote the following: "For the Jews, the Damascus affair launched modern Jewish politics on an international scale, and for American Jews, it represented their first effort at creating a distinctive political agenda." Just as the United States is using this affair, I mean, they're using it to their benefit to proclaim its presence on a global scale. Remember, the United States is first growing into that role. So are American Jews in their newspapers and at mass meetings, announcing to their co-religionists in France and England that they too are now players in the global Jewish diplomacy. So American influence and American Jewish influence clearly comes about as a result of this incident. Jews had found themselves completely unprepared for the tribulations they suffered, but they learned from this tragedy to organize and to lobby. And from that event comes the first stirrings of modern Jewish solidarity, the basis of the formidable institutions that have come about for us since. According to Johann Schwartz, the events also encouraged the growth of the modern Jewish press. As a result, a sense of solidarity was evoked among the Jewish communities of Europe that had never been experienced before, is what he said. And thus, the Damascus affair gave birth to the modern Jewish press. I need you to know these accusations haven't gone away. In the Egyptian daily, Al Akhbar, similar blood libel accusations and accusations of the Damascus affair in particular showed up in 2000 and in the year 2001 in an article titled "The Last Scene in the Life of Father Thomas." In 2002, the Middle East Media Research Institute reported that some of the 1848 accusations emerge in a 1983 book, all right, titled "The Damascus Blood Libel" by the Syrian Minister of Defense. So the Father Thomas event is still being used in modern Muslim world. The book was described as being influential in international anti-Semitic circles and as a reliable source of information on ritual murder by the Jews. All right, any comments on this first, the Damascus affair?
Did the Sephardic Jews join in on this? Because, you know, Damascus is part of the Middle East, and
Yeah.
you know, not just the Ashkenaz Jews and the.
Right. Yep. All right, the second event sort of plays a
Wait,
little.
hang on a second. I'm
Sure.
not even sure what my comment's going to be, but we live in a time where people believe ridiculous things about other people.
Right.
And even though my whole life we've been talking about the protocols and the blood libel and all that stuff related to fabrications that people believe about Jews, I think it's pretty clear now that people will believe anything that fits their social construct in their brain.
Yeah,
And anti-Semitism is a common thread, I guess, in a lot of that.
when you've lived your life with a certain way of thinking, cognitive dissonance makes it extremely difficult to shift. I have to be willing to say, you know what, I was just plain, I was wrong, I was stupid, whatever it is you want to say, whatever the label is, that is not an easy thing for human beings to do. Doesn't mean we shouldn't, but it's not an easy thing for us to do.
But stories like this one just make me really resent the French more
Yeah,
than I already did.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And this, by the way, this is in the Napoleon, no, in the world of the Napoleonic rule of the welcoming of the French to the Jewish citizenship. All right. So during the Damascus affair, Jews discovered the power of publicity in fighting prejudice and discrimination. They were successful in shaping public opinion because they were in a world in which at least most of the people had some concept of universal human rights. They were also successful because modern rulers, including those who were dictators, could not afford to completely ignore public opinions at home and abroad. And that's still true today. If that weren't true in a place like Russia, they wouldn't be controlling the media. Right? There is a concern for public opinion, even in places like Russia. In 1858, however, an incident in what is now Italy revealed that public opinion does not always prevail. Early in the morning of June 24th, papal guards in Bologna came to the home of a Jewish couple, Solomon David Mortara and his wife, and they demanded their 6-year-old son, Edgardo, and I'm just going to call him Edgar for the time being, one of their 8 children. They demanded that they give him up. To the parents' horror, the guards had a written order signed by the Father Feletti, the local priest, and authorized by the Pope himself to take the child and be raised as a ward of the Christian state. Parents, convinced that a terrible error had been made, they raced to Feletti's home, only to learn there was no error. 5 years ago, prior, when the child was only a year old, a Christian servant in the house, in the family, had secretly baptized the baby when he was sick by sprinkling water on his head and saying a prayer. The woman left her job. She never said a word, didn't tell anybody about what she had done. But over time, she began to speak to friends and share this with her. And the information eventually reaches Father Feletti. Under Catholic doctrine, emergency baptism can be administered to a person in danger of imminent death by anyone, man or woman, even a non-Christian. And it is considered a valid baptism as long as it is done in the manner that is prescribed by Christian tradition. It was originally intended as a relief for Catholic families living in a world of high infant mortality, and therefore not necessarily having access to anybody to do so. And therefore, what it did is it allowed families, before they would bury an infant, to baptize the child. That was the intent. Okay, it wasn't intended to be used on Jews. In the view of the Catholic Church of the 1800s, however, once a child had been baptized, even if it had been done without the parents' approval or knowledge, the child was considered a Christian. And under papal law, Jewish parents could not rear a Christian child, even if the child was their own. Frantic efforts to release the boy failed. Edgardo wasn't the first child to undergo this experience, but he was the first to have the parents to have their case publicized. Again, the power of the printing press. In almost every Western city, Christians and Jews protested the heartless abduction of a small child. They were outraged that a child could be taken from their parents for any reason at all. Several government leaders, including the Emperor of France, found the story so troubling that they tried to persuade the Pope to release the boy. He refused. Church authorities told the Mortaras that they could have the child back if they would convert to Catholicism and raise him as a Catholic. All right, they refused. Moses Montefiore tried to arrange a meeting with the Pope to discuss the matter, only to be told there's nothing to discuss. The church saw no reason at all to respond to public opinion about a matter of faith. And in this case, the press, the publicity only hardened the church's stand. When a delegation of prominent Jews saw the Pope in 1859, he told them very directly, I could care less what the world thinks. After another meeting, he brought Edgar with him to show the world that the boy was happy in his care. Remember, the child was 6 years old when he was taken. And in 1865, he said, I had the right and the duty to do what I had done for this boy. And if I had to, I would do it again. 6 years later, defending his decision against his detractors, Pius said, of these dogs, there are so many of them at present in Rome, and we hear them howling in the streets, and they are disturbing in all the places. Politically, this backfires on the Pope. The Mortara event backfires on the Pope, and the incident serves as a catalyst for far-reaching political changes, and it leads to the church's temporal power in Rome. The fate of one boy came to symbolize the entire revolutionary campaign. In the Kingdom of Sardinia, the largest independent state in Italy at the time, the center of the liberal nationalist movement for Italian unification, both the government and the press used this case to reinforce their claims that the Papal States were being run by a medievalist and should be liberated from papal control. The Mortara incident may have helped persuade public opinion that the Papal States could be conquered. And when the French garrison was removed in 1870 and the Italian army assaulted the city, the newly unified liberal kingdom of Italy annexed it. Soon after that, the independent kingdom of Italy is established in 1870. Jews become citizens of this new nation, entitled to the full protection under the law. Almost immediately, the authorities informed the Mortaras that their son was free to join the family, but it was too late. The child was now 18 years old and had begun studying to be a priest. He ultimately becomes a priest of the Augustinian order. By the end of the 18th century, anti-Semitism had found a home almost everywhere in Europe and beyond, this time through nationalist lenses.
You mean 19th century, right? By the end of the 19th century.
Yeah, that's exactly true.
Okay.
Thank you. Scientists who tried to show, now there are scientists who tried to show that the differences that existed within a so-called race were greater than the differences between races. They're trying to make the distinction that there's not as much of a racial difference as we think. They were successful and they were ignored. In the late 1800s, for example, the German Anthropological Society conducted a study to determine if there were racial differences between Jewish and Aryan children. After studying 7 million children, this is a large sampling. This is not one whose N you really have to question, okay? The society concluded that the two groups were more alike than different. Historian George Massey said of the study, and it's reading 3. I'm going to ask somebody to read, and I need to answer somebody at the door, and I'll be right back. So Karen, I think you have the 3rd box. I'll be right back.
This survey should have ended controversies about the existence of pure Aryans and Jews. However, it seems to have had surprisingly small impact. The idea of race had been infused with myths, stereotypes and subjectivities long ago, and a scientific survey could change little. The idea of pure superior races and the concept of a racial enemy solved too many pressing problems to be discarded. Who put out this survey?
German
Okay.
anthropological.
German anthropologist.
Did you say German anthropologists?
Yes.
I'd love to see that survey.
Yeah, 1870s, he said.
Sorry about that. The challenges of having a relatively empty building during this time. All right. So the myth that Jews belong to a distinct and inferior race continues to grow throughout Europe. The myth gave individuals and governments a new excuse for discrimination and persecution. It's now based not on ethnicity. It's now based not on religion, but it's based on race. Okay, this is a time in which Darwinism is exploding. And so
I thought you said, can I ask a question? I thought you said that this survey by the German anthropologists showed that there wasn't any difference.
that's
racially.
correct. And it says it should have ended the controversies, but it didn't.
Yeah, well,
All right, that's again the cognitive dissonance. It did show that, but all I can say is they must have looked at the science and said fake news.
It didn't fit their narrative.
Right. All right, so you have the beginnings of a racial distinction here. You know where this is going in terms of Hitler. We understand where we're leading. I want
But the whole eugenics movement,
What's
Yeah.
that?
the whole eugenics movement was not just in Germany, it was
Right.
everywhere.
Right.
And
Correct.
maybe connected to the whole industrial age and a love of the scientific method or an analytical approach to problems. I don't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
Wasn't this when they were measuring like the brain with the
Yeah.
Head size.
Look, it's one with the introduction of scientific method. It's the introduction of one hypothesis and one theory after another to be tested, which is good on certain levels. Let's not. The issue is, how is it being used? Like any other knowledge, it can be used constructively or destructively. I want to look at Richard Wagner. Richard Wagner is somebody that is a major player in anti-Semitism. It has led to some very interesting discussions between David Crone and me, loving disagreement on whether or not one should be listening to the music of Wagner, which is incredibly beautiful. But it raises the sort of the ethical dilemma we always pose to the kids as well. It's in high school. We'll say to them, we learned a lot from the scientific knowledge that the Nazi doctors, through their experiments.
Well, the same in Israel too. I mean, between the Israeli Philharmonic, if
Right.
they should play Wagner or not.
Right.
It was a
And the
big
question is, do you use the music? Do you use the scientific knowledge that's come out of these kinds of things, or do you not? And I'm not here to tell you what your answer should be, but the dilemma exists. Okay. So German composer Richard Wagner exemplified the synthesis of nationalism, anti-Semitism, and racism. In his essay, Das Judentum in der Musik, Wagner, who resented the fame of Jewish composer Felix Mendelssohn, asserted that Jews debased German music. They could not express, they could not possess the feelings that animated the German soul. They had their own distinct folk soul, which had been formed by a degenerate culture. Jews were the opposite of German artists, he said, because they set aside Germans would set aside personal gain to pursue pure ideals, whereas Jews must inescapably have a detrimental influence on everything German and German Jewish culture. Germans, he said, should shun contact with the Jews because of our deep-seated involuntary feeling of repugnance for the Jewish nation. And in his essay's concluding passages, Wagner stipulates that the only solution is Untergang, destruction or annihilation. Now, whether or not he meant annihilation literally or the disappearance of the Jewish people as a people, Jews as a people and Judaism as a religion, nonetheless, many of his admirers and followers, most assuredly Hitler and the Nazis, took Wagner strictly by the letter of what he was saying. In later essays, Wagner's anti-Semitism grows even more vitriolic and racist. In the Wagnerian Journal, he states, "I hold the Jewish race to be born the enemy of pure humanity and everything noble in it. It is certain that it is running us Germans into the ground." Wagner and his wife frequently refer to Jews as vermin and lice. You can hear the echoes, the very language the Nazi murderers would later use. The Nazis utilized Wagner for propaganda. Hitler stated on numerous occasions, "Whoever wants to understand National Socialist Germany must know Wagner." Reading number 4 is long.
What year was this approximately that he wrote this?
1850.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's about right. He dies in 83. So that's some in those. Yes. Reading number 4. It's long. Let's split it up. Bob, you got a third. Sandra, you got a third. Alana, you've got a third. And we'll go from there.
Our desire to give the Jews their rights sprang much more from principle than from real sympathy. And all the talking and writing about Jewish emancipation failed to mask our unwillingness to have any actual dealings with them. So here we reach the starting point of our inquiry. We shall attempt to understand the involuntary repulsion aroused in us by the personality and customs of the Jews in order to justify this instinctive feeling, which is obviously stronger and more overpowering than our desire to be free of it. We are deliberately distorting our nature if we feel ashamed to proclaim the natural revulsion aroused in by Jewishness. As the world is constituted today, the Jew is more than emancipated. He's the ruler, and he will continue to rule as long as money remains the power to which all our activities are subjugated. We need to prove that modern art has been taken over by the Jews. This is a fact that leaps to the eyes of the unbidden. But if emancipation from Judaism seems to us a prime necessity, we must test our strength for this war of liberation. We shall not gain this strength merely by an abstract definition of the situation, but by an intimate knowledge of the nature of our deep-seated involuntary feeling of repugnance for the Jewish nature. By this unconquerable feeling, when what we hate in the Jewish character must be revealed to us, and when we know it, we can take measures against the Jewish character. By revealing him clearly, we may hope to wipe the demon from the field, where he has been able to thrive only under the protective cover of darkness, a darkness that we good-natured humanists ourselves have offered him to make his appearance less disgusting.
Thank you. Sandra. Yeah, awful.
In ordinary life, the Jew, who, as we know, possesses a God of his own, strikes us first by his outward appearance, which, whatever European nationality we belong to, has something unpleasantly foreign to that nationality. We instinctively feel we have nothing in common with a man who looks like that. This must, in past times, must have been upsetting to the Jew. Nowadays, however, not only does he not mind this, his successes lead him to consider his differences from us as advantage. Ignoring the moral aspect of this unpleasant freak of nature and considering only the aesthetic, we will merely point out that to us, this exterior could never be acceptable as a subject for a painting. If a portrait painter has to portray a Jew, he usually takes his model from his imagination and wisely transforms or else completely omits everything that in real life characterizes the Jew's appearance. This is very important. A race whose general appearance we cannot consider suitable for aesthetic purposes is by the same token incapable of any artistic presentation of its nature. Considerably more important is the effect upon us of Jewish speech, and this is the point at which we should consider Jewish influence on music. The Jews speak the language of the country in which he has lived from generation to generation, but he always speaks it as a foreigner. To begin with, the fact that the Jew speaks modern languages only as a learnt and not as a native makes it impossible for him ever to speak colloquially, authoritatively, or from the depths of his being. A language, expression, and its evolution are not separate elements, but part of a historical community. And only he who has unconsciously matured in this community can take any part in what it creates. But the Jew has stood quite apart from the community. To create poetry in a foreign language has always been impossible, even for the greatest geniuses. Yet our entire European civilization and art have remained foreign to the Jew, for he has taken no part in the evolution of either. At best, he has been a cold, even a hostile onlooker. In this language, this art, the Jew can only intimate. He can create neither poem nor work of art. You want me to go on or one more?
No, okay, Ilana, if you would finish up. Are you okay with
I'm
reading?
sorry, I don't have the material. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
All right, sorry, Marcia, we're back to you. No problem. Marcia, we're back to you.
Yeah, we are repelled in particular by the purely oral aspect of Jewish speech. Contact with our culture has not, even after 2,000 years, weaned the Jew away from the peculiarities of Semitic pronunciation. The shrill, sibilant buzzing of his voice falls strangely and unpleasantly on our ears. His misuse of words whose exact shade of meaning escapes him, and his mistakenly placed phrases combine to turn his utterance into an unbearable, muddled nonsense. Consequently, when we, I guess, listen to Jewish speech, we are involuntarily struck by its offensive manner and so diverted from understanding of its matter. This is of exceptional importance in explaining the effect of modern Jewish music on us. When we listen to a Jew talking, we are unconsciously upset by the complete lack of purely human expression in his speech. The cold indifference of its peculiar blabber can never rise to the excitement of real passion. And if we, in conversation with a Jew, should find our own words becoming heated, he will always be evasive because he is incapable of really deep feeling. He will never be excited by a mutual exchange of feelings with us, but only by matters of particular egotistic interest to his vanity or to his sense of profit. This, together with his manner of speaking, makes him to our ears more ridiculous than sympathetic. If these defects in his manner of speaking render the Jew almost incapable of artistic enunciation of his feelings, how much less capable he will be of expressing these feelings in song. Song is, after all, speech heightened by passion. Music is the language of passion. If the Jew's already ridiculously vehement manner of speech is to be heightened, we shall be further alienated from him. If we were repelled by his appearance and his speech, his song will engage our attention only to the extent that we exclaim at so absurd a phenomenon. It is understandably in song, as the most indisputably vivid expression of personal feeling, that the offensive peculiarity of the Jewish nature reaches its peak. But it is for every aspect of art, not only those connected with song, that on a natural hypothesis, we must consider the Jew unsuited. Should I finish?
Yeah, please.
The Jew's idea on visual observation have rendered it impossible for any visual artist to emerge from them. Their eyes have always busied themselves far more with practical affairs than with beauty, or the spiritual substance of the material world. As far as I can discover, no Jewish architect or sculptor has appeared in our time. Whether recent painters of Jewish descent can really be considered creative artists, I must leave to the judgment of connoisseurs. Presumably, however, the attitude of these artists to their art does not essentially differ from that of modern Jewish composers toward music. The Jew, completely incapable of communicating artistically with us, either by his appearance or his speech, and least of all by his singing, has nevertheless succeeded in completely taking over public taste in that most popular of modern arts, music. Can I add something here? You had mentioned Mendelssohn, that Wagner was very much against. He was also against an opera composer, Meyerbeer, who was Jewish, who was the son of a rabbi, who was German. And he had gone to Paris in the 1820s and particularly 1830s and just made a huge splash with his grand operas. And Wagner, meanwhile, when he went to Paris, had a big flop. And so there was a ton of resentment against people falling, say, in Paris for this cheap kind of sensational music that audiences loved. So that was another target of Wagner, a big one, Meyerbeer.
That makes sense. So you read this and you come away, anybody you want to listen to Here Comes the Bride, that doesn't work for me. Yeah.
Marcia, when was this guy Meyerbeer? What years was he?
His operas became important from the 1830s to early 1850s in Paris. And they were big on spectacle, grand opera. And again, Guy was just a huge, huge success, and Wagner resented him tremendously.
Okay, thank you.
So I come away from reading this article with a sense that what's been written is a blueprint for hatred of Jews. What also is terrifying, it clearly was used by Hitler. It could be used by all the hatred that goes on here in America. But what is really just overpowering to me is this guy can write. This guy is brilliant. It's not just that he's a musician. This guy has an ability with words. He's bright, and these are his thoughts. That is terrifying. This is not some backwoods hick.
It's the conflict we see when most of us put all people who, even today, who think certain ways in saying that they're all not bright. And then we discover people we know are bright thinking ways that we don't understand.
Right.
It's not going to specific politics or anything. It's just
right.
like
But because it's on both sides, it's both extremes.
Yeah.
On the right, it's what you've just described.
Yeah.
And on the left, it's the far left extremists who are often the college campuses where they're highly educated and they're teaching. They call it anti-Israel, but it's really anti-Semitism at its core.
Yeah,
That's the greatest danger in society, a charismatic leader who is able to portray his narrative and in that light. What's of interest is that Felix Mendelssohn actually converted to Christianity.
Yeah.
Many of the, going back to Moses Mendelssohn in the late 18th century, before the Haskalah, the German Jewish synthesis at that time was carry on your religion, but at the same time, become a German.
Right.
Adapt to the culture that you're living in. And that German Jewish synthesis really failed by the mid 19th century, where it became obvious.
It didn't even take that long. If you remember, I said to you, Moses Mendelssohn had 6 children, 5 of them converted.
Correct. Correct.
Right.
Even as late as 1900, you have Gustav Mahler converting to Catholicism in Austria, that the only way to get a position for the opera and maybe also the symphony was to convert. So there.
Marcia, that's correct in Europe, because Heinrich Heine, the poet, converted to Christianity because he said the baptismal certificate is my passport to European culture.
Wow.
Yes.
So what about when were the famous salons in Vienna, many of which were wealthy Jewish families.
I don't know.
When-
Like,
The Arnsteins and people like that.
yeah, and the art, you know, the ones that the Woman of Gold was produced from those families. The paintings, is that, you know, I'd have to look up things.
Okay.
Is that a little bit later? I think it might be just toward the end of the 18th, 19th century. and then the
have to
early
admit, art is not an area of my expertise. I don't know.
Because I know that you know, the painting "The Woman of Gold" comes from very wealthy Jewish families in Vienna that had salons and all. But it might be slightly later.
Okay. All right, so I want to finish up with a couple comments. Number one, next week we don't have a class. I'm trying to keep my own head and straight. And since I don't have a class on Sunday because of Yom Limud, which
Yeah.
everybody should be at. All right. I'm not going to do Thursday. I'm trying to keep the Sundays and Thursdays concurrent, so I'm not all over the place in my head in terms of teaching. That said, so we'll meet again on the 25th, Thursday the 25th, which is the morning before Purim. I'm also going to teach 2 days earlier on the 23rd, a modern critical analysis of the Book of Esther. That's at the Zoom in noon on Tuesday. So Tuesday I'll do the Book of Esther, and Thursday we'll continue with French, Russian, Romanian, and even some early American anti-Semitism of the 1880s and so that time frame. All right. Tuesday the 23rd, Esther. Thursday the 25th, we'll continue with the anti-Semitism. All right.
So, going backwards, I was reading a novel for another group, a book group, and it's set in Italy, way back, something you taught way back at, it's Savonarola.
Okay.
And I remembered, it seems like we talked about that the ghettos in Florence and the increase. So it's not a Jewish book. It's actually an art group that's reading it, and it is set in a merchant, a fabric merchant, which made me wonder if they could have originally been Jewish family. But that was something we discussed back then. That was the 1400s with the spread of.
This was the time in the mid 19th century that Jewish denominations started to develop.
Yeah.
Reform
Yeah.
Judaism, conservative Judaism, all this was taking place in Germany, Berlin, Bonn.
The mid 1800s. Yeah.
Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Geiger, who with the principles involved.
Yep.
Zachariah Frankel.
Yep. Well, Frankel was the one who broke off, but yes. Frankel breaks off to form the beginnings of the conservative movement, but he was part of that until the 1880s.
He was invited to JTS. I think that angered Hirsch, I believe.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. All right. Thank you all. Have an awesome week. Stay warm. Start getting out those bundles of blankets.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.